they apply to a relationship, because I think this is something that commonly jumps up and bites you in the butt in recovery, is that expectation that as you're doing this really, really hard work, you can look over and you can see the people that you love, the people that you're committed to right there beside you. But often it doesn't happen that way, because change happens in a pretty specific way and at different rates for people. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then I'll be open for question and answer afterwards. So let me get the screen sharing going here. All right. Can everybody see the slide? Are you seeing the slide, Scott? Okay, cool. So these stages of change, they come from some researchers, last names Prochaska and De Clemente. In the 70s, they got really curious about people who were trying to quit smoking. And so they studied that. And it turns out that these stages that they noticed with people who are trying to quit smoking, they are actually very applicable. And research has replicated the validity of these stages with all sorts of change. So we're going to take a look at them. Keep in mind with this that these stages are not linear. It's more like a spiral, and we tend to revisit stages with different kinds of change going on. But I wanted to give this as some education and hopefully some context too for what you might be experiencing in your relationships as you yourself are engaged in recovery from addiction or a loved one of yours is. So the first stage we call pre-contemplation. In pre-contemplation, the person is usually unaware of the problem associated with the behavior. That doesn't mean that they're unaware of the behavior. They just haven't linked it to the consequences of the behavior. They're certain that the positives of the behavior outweigh the negative. So in addiction, we frequently see, well, the stress relief that I get from this, or my sense of identity, my sense of safety, or whatever, that outweighs the impact on my relationships or the secrets I'm keeping. Usually in pre-contemplation, the person's not interested in change, they're unwilling to change, and there's no intention. So we might call this a lack of awareness or resistance. We start with this as a stage of change because if somebody's in this stage and we want them to be somewhere else, usually what we try to do to strong arm them to change actually further entrenches them in this pre-contemplation or this not feeling like there's a need to change. The second stage is contemplation. We start to become aware of the problems that are associated with the behavior, but we're ambivalent regarding the positives or negatives. So we've moved from this place where this behavior benefits me and there's no cost to it to maybe it costs me, maybe it doesn't, I'm not sure. The person here starts to explore the potential for change. They desire to change the behavior, but they may lack confidence or commitment. Usually in the pre-contemplation stage, we're looking at somebody who is looking to get started on a change process within 6 months. So we have more awareness and we have more openness starting. This is an internal shift. You may not see a lot of changes in behavior as somebody's in contemplation, but they may talk to you a little bit differently. They may be willing to talk to some other people. Again, there's that awareness and openness. Next, what happens is decision, and this is not a stage, this is an event. This is where the conclusion is reached that the negatives of the behavior outweigh the positives, and we choose to change the behavior. And so this is where commitment really starts, is in that decision to do something different. In 12-step rooms, they usually talk about the decision phase coinciding with rock bottom or a spiritual awakening. But it's that moment where we realize we can't keep going like we have, and we're committed to do something about it. So that brings us to the third stage, which is preparation. This is a really, really important stage, and it's one that I often find with the people that I'm working with, that I really want to make sure that we don't short circuit this stage, because it really sets us up for success in larger change. So we accept the responsibility for our behavior, meaning it's up to me to make this change. I'm the only one that can make this change. We evaluate and select techniques for the behavior. So this is where we do our homework. In relation to addiction, this may be where people research different therapists, or they may even visit different 12-step meetings or different peer support meetings. They may come to seminars like this. Let me just get some information and see what's out there. As we start to see what's out there to help us in change, we start to build confidence and commitment, because we're starting to get a more solid idea of where we want to go with this. That timeline for when we intend to change shortens down to 1 month. So we're really looking at taking action soon. There can be a lot of anticipation in this. What is it going to be like? and there's a lot of willingness. I'll usually see with people in the preparation stage, I think they're in a good place when they have this, I'm open to whatever. I'll do whatever it takes, and they're really open to looking into different options. In stage 4, we move into action. We engage with self-directed behavior in our change effort. That self-directed behavior may be at the recommendation of a therapist or a sponsor or a loved one, but it's really the person is saying, I'm doing this for me, and I'm doing this because this is an important change for me to make, not because somebody wants them to do it. We gain new insights and develop new skills. We're consciously choosing our new behavior over and over and over again. We learn to overcome the tendencies for the unwanted behavior. So again, in a lot of recovery speak, that might be we get to know our triggers and we learn how to avoid them or alter them. We're in the active stage of change. The original research said less than 6 months. But I would actually say 6 months to a year, because one of the things that, especially with the holidays approaching, I find with a lot of my clients, if they're new to recovery and the holidays approach, it's almost like the work we've done to this point almost doesn't matter because the holidays bring up a lot. So engaging in the action stage over a year gives us a chance to see how we are responding and interfacing with our life through all 4 seasons. This is where we'll start to see a lot of enthusiasm and momentum. It may not be because we just hit this skyrocket for success and there's no problems, but it may be this feeling that I'm doing something that works. This is making a difference for me. And what's changing may not be perceivable by anybody on the outside, but the person who's engaged in the change feels a difference, they feel a shift, and they feel hope and enthusiasm going forward. Stage 5 is maintenance. This is where we move out of that needing to, like in the context of addiction, needing to monitor our thoughts all the time, our behaviors. A lot of that's become automatic. We've mastered the new behavior. It doesn't take a lot of effort to maintain. We established a desired new behavior pattern and self-control. The focus now is remaining alert to high-risk situations. We focus on lapse prevention. And so we're scanning the horizon, recognizing that we've kind of put things in order and our new way of living is more automatic than not for us, but we still have to be concerned and aware of things that could come along to derail that. We'll see a lot of perseverance and consolidation here. So this is where you might see yourself in your healing process. Maybe you started early in recovery going to a meeting every day and therapy twice a week and workshops on the weekend. As we move into maintenance, we consolidate some of that, and we may be realizing, I get the same out of all of that from going to my home meeting, work with my sponsor, work with my therapist. So we may see some of the things that we've been engaged in to change is we're cutting back, but we're not cutting back out of exhaustion or I just don't want to do this anymore. We're cutting back more out of recognizing what the level of care is that we need, what's necessary for us. Lapse or relapse, this is not a stage. Again, this is an event, and it can occur at any time. There's a lot of personal distress or social pressure that interrupts our behavior change process. This is a temporary loss of progress, which resumes at an earlier stage. So when we relapse, we're not going all the way back to pre-contemplation. And I think that's what a lot of concerned significant others really fear about the person who's in addiction recovery is when they lapse, they don't see a problem, they're back to the start. Very rarely is that the case. It's really helpful to view a lapse or a relapse as an educational experience. This will help me to learn something that I missed. So if I have this set of triggers that I wasn't aware of and I ran headfirst into that, one of the things that my lapse or my relapse might teach me is that set of triggers is really significant to me. And now that I know that, I can do something about that. So while it's also not a necessary part of the change process, but we often see it happen. And in my experience, the attitude around lapse or relapse for the person who's changing makes all the difference. If it's an end of the world thing for you, good luck making change happen long term. If it's something that you can roll with, learn from, adapt to, you're probably going to be okay. So in the lapse or relapse, we have this simultaneous feeling of danger. What I just did is significant, and I can't keep doing that. There's also opportunity. What did I learn here? What does that tell me about me? What does that tell me about my needs? In stage 6, and this stage is a little controversial, and so I'm presenting it for information, not to say this is the way that it is, but they call this the termination stage. And this is where we have adopted a new self-image that's consistent with our desired behavior and lifestyle. We don't react to the temptation in any situation. We express confidence and we enjoy self-control, and we appreciate a happier and healthier life. I also look at this as we're on to the next thing. And hopefully, as we go through recovery, this is something that I've noticed both in my own recovery and with a lot of the clients that I work with. Hopefully, the next change is not crisis-induced. Hopefully, the next change that we work on is, this is what I want to add to my life. This is what I want to add to my relationship. This is about the time where I'll see couples that I work with, when both of them kind of reach that termination stage from early recovery, that their relationship really starts to blossom and really starts to grow. Because what used to be a giant threat to the relationship, and it took so much mental and emotional bandwidth to keep it from happening, that's now managed behavior. And it's not taking a lot of that energy, and that energy can go into positive growth. I consider the termination phase valid for change, because I'm a big believer in the brain's capacity to grow, even into old age. We know that new neurons are made all the time. And I also really like the idea that one of the reasons why we engage into recovery is to have a life that's very different than the one that we've known. So I bring this up today in this webinar because I think it can really help with some of the relationship issues and your evaluation of the relationship issues, when we recognize what stage am I in and what stage might my partner be in. Otherwise, we may bring a hammer to put the screw in the wood, or we may bring a wrench to put the nail in the wood. We may bring the wrong set of tools, or a set of tools that's not as useful, not as helpful to getting us what we want. So that is it from my portion. We'll open up the Q&A now.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think most of you have been here before. I recognize a lot of the names. If you want to ask a question, use the Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen. Just click on the Q&A button, type in your question, and we will answer them for you.
And also, while you're formulating questions, I'll put out there, if you would like a copy of those slides, I think they can contact you, can't they, Scott? Or they can contact Seeking Integrity?
Yeah, you can send us an email at admin@seekingintegrity.org. I'll put that in the chat feature for people, and then I'll either forward the request to Jonathan, or he can send me the slides and I'll put them up on our site for him, or something like that.
Oh, that would be great. We'll make those available so you can look at that.
We can do that easily. I'm going to put that in the chat feature right now. So type your questions in, and we'll get to them. While they're formulating questions, I did have in the early contemplation stages, I have a friend, I'm not going to take his inventory and judge him and call him an alcoholic, but he should probably stop drinking. He says things like, I'm only drinking half as much now because I only drink after 5 p.m. You know, he's in, I think, the contemplation stage. And, you know, yeah. I say, gee, you know, I've never heard anybody who didn't need to quit drinking say, I just found a way to cut my drinking in half. You know, it's only alcoholics do that. So if somebody's in contemplation or pre-contemplation, you hear things that, you know, people who don't have a problem don't say.
I think that's one of the things that can be really, it can be frustrating about being in the relationship with somebody where change might need to happen for them, is that really is like, that's taking some steps without a plan, right? Like, this is problem enough that I want to figure something else out. But sometimes as the folks on the outside, we look at that and say, that's really all you're going to do? But again, I like the stages of change model because it reminds me that I don't really have a say where anybody else is at in those stages. But when I recognize someone's in pre-contemplation, I can save a lot of breath and I can save a lot of energy from trying to push them along.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of why I brought it up. It's just, it can be really, it's frustrating for me because I've known this guy forever.
Yeah.
I wish he would go to a meeting, but it's not going to happen. Okay, we got a couple questions here. The first one is from a 43-year-old gay man. So he says, I've been in a relationship that I thought was committed with my male partner for 20 years. Along the way, he admitted to meeting someone 3 or 4 times. Terrible, but I tolerated it because I told myself in 3 or 4 years to meet someone for 20 minutes 3 or 4 times was not a big deal. But 3 months ago, I found out that 6 years prior to meeting me and our entire relationship of 20 years, he was a sex addict. He just got back from a 2-week inpatient program a few weeks ago. He's doing amazing, seeing his local CSAT once a week. I'm seeing a CSAT once a week. We're going to couples therapy once a week. Good for you. We're doing all of these amazing webinars as much as possible. Thank you. That all sounds great, and it is, but I'm still 100% scared that he could relapse at any time. Sounds dumb. No, it doesn't. But I'm scared to death. We have 3 kids in elementary school. Never saw this coming. In his case, it's bad, really, really bad. Hooked up with hundreds of people. Okay.
I think the questions continued in the next one. I don't know if there's a limit, but
yeah, he is lucky, not dead or in jail. So my question is, sorry, what's one simple thing besides therapy, because communicating with him that we could do on a daily basis to continue moving forward? So one simple thing to move forward. He says he's not triggered, not contemplating acting out, that he's happy for the first time in his life. What else can I do?
Yeah. First of all, just like you said, Scott, you're not dumb for being scared. You're recognizing that there's a past and that there's a potential for that past to become present again. I think that's what learning in relationships is. When our relationships are healthy and functioning, we don't hold the past over each other, but we do sometimes hold that past lightly. That's part of knowing who our partner is. And I think the closer we are to D-Day and things changing, the more scared we are. So what I read in this question is that we're really looking for some connection on a daily basis. And I would say you're doing all the right things. Like, this is a very impressive recovery plan. And I don't know that I would recommend anything significant that you are not already doing or haven't already done. What comes to mind for me is it's an exercise from Smart Recovery, and I've talked about Smart Recovery a little bit on these webinars before. It's they call it a secular alternative to the 12 steps. So it's really focused on tools for change. And they have this exercise called the 3 questions, which I think can be really empowering for couples to work together and kind of have it be a check-in. So the first question is, what do you want in your future? The second question is, what are you doing right now? And the assumption is, what are you doing right now to get there, where you want to go in your future? And then the third question is, how do you feel about what you're doing? I think being able to have, as we talked about the stages of change, I can hear some of that mismatch in the stages here, where the addicted partner feels really good, happier than they've ever been, feels a lot of momentum. The partner who has been betrayed may feel some scared. I'm not so certain about this, but I don't want to get in the way. So those questions really help us to respect where we're at in the differences there. It's okay to be scared when your spouse is confident. It's okay to be nervous about the future when your spouse feels like they have momentum, because your work is really different with each other. So finding some ways that we can communicate together. How are you doing? What's going on? What's important to you? That aren't just about, how are you doing? Are you about to relapse? Because that can get really burdensome for a relationship. But I like that the rituals that kind of set up a window into each other's lives. And what that does over time is it can start to build some connection again. And as time passes and we see the behavior changes stick, not just on a behavior level, but we see the emotions that go along with that stick, then the trust starts to come back. But that's something that I would really recommend if you're in marriage therapy. I'd recommend talking to the marriage therapist about some of the things that you can do for emotional check-in, some things that build trust and build that coupleship connection on a regular basis.
One of the things I would add to that is, you're going to be at a different place in recovery than he is, because he's known what he was doing for 20 years. You just got run over by a truck. You just got completely blindsided with a whole bunch of information that you were not expecting. So, he may trust himself way before you trust him. And that's normal.
Well said. I think that's right on the nose. And so as part of that too, make sure that your program supports you. If he's attending meetings and therapy and all that, and you need support and self-care and all of that, that's gonna help to create a space where there can be connection and trust again. But that's not anything that you need to rush. I think artificially produced trust isn't good trust. The kind that comes up organically because we've done the work together is the kind that we really lean on.
And he's the one who has to earn your trust. You don't have to work on yourself to give him trust.
Nope.
It's just going to happen when he earns it.
Yeah.
So send us some more questions, everybody. Abby put in the comments, as a recovering alcoholic, she played the same game as my friend, except she didn't drink after 9 p.m.
Abby Normal was a little more liberal with themselves.
Yeah.
That's always so fascinating to me as I work with people in those early stages of change, the pre-contemplation and the contemplation. Just how slippery our own mind can get when we're grappling big changes that need to happen, but we're scared to do it, or we feel overwhelmed. That's actually when lives aren't on the line and it's not active trauma happening. I love to look at denial and reasoning because I think it's funny. It's amazing how thoroughly we can twist our reality to make ourselves comfortable.
When I went into treatment, the therapist there had me write a list of 20 reasons why the things I was doing were okay. So, and I then had to read that list out loud.
You filled up the list with 20?
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. I had tons of reasons why what I was doing was okay. But then I had to read it to everybody in my therapy group. And by about the fourth item, I thought, oh my God, I am crazy. But in my head, and when I was writing it on paper, it was like, oh, well, this is all, it's okay for me to use prostitutes because I'm a nice trick. I'm clean. What does that have to do with it?
This is good solid stuff.
Yeah, just insane justifications for my addiction. So
yeah. That's what I would say as the partner of someone who is struggling with addiction. It's not your job to straighten out that distorted thinking. That's what their therapy is going to do. That's what their groups are going to do. I think the job of when you're not in that place and your partner's in some of those earlier stages of change, your job is to stay where you're at and keep the ground under your feet. Because that can be a rabbit hole to go into, to try to argue that with somebody. What you just described, Scott, I think is how that change starts to happen most effectively, is you came to the realization instead of somebody looking at your list and saying, well, these are all crazy for the following reasons. You got to hear it, and that makes all the difference.
And I needed other addicts to laugh at me and to go, yeah, you are crazy. I didn't need a partner to laugh at me and say, you're crazy, or a partner to yell at me and say, you're crazy. I needed people who had done it to tell me I was crazy. So, yeah. We have plenty of time for questions, so please type them in. Use the Q&A feature.
The questions don't even have to be about the stages of change. If you have something else regarding relationships and recovery, we've had I've talked on previous webinars about making relationships with your workplace better, friendships. So any questions at all?
You have a seminar that you do in Utah once in a while about healthy dating in recovery. Can you tell people about that?
Yeah. So we launched this last year, and we launched it because we've heard from a lot of people in recovery, whether they were the addicted person or whether they were the partner of that person, that when it comes time for them to get back into dating, if their relationship didn't last recovery, or if they didn't have a relationship to begin with, that they feel that pull to get back into dating, and they're terrified because their history of relationships is not great. So we developed this 3-day workshop for people in recovery to come and to take a look at why dating scares them, and to have an opportunity to really hone in on their strengths and what they want their recovery to bring them, and to leave with a solid dating plan, and most importantly, not to be afraid to try out new relationships. So we have one coming up at the end of January. We did one in June that was women only, and we have one coming up in January that's men only. And we've already started to fill some of the seats, but we're going to have a group of minimum of 6, maximum of 10 men together, taking a look at making dating in recovery work and really overcoming that fear and starting to get the relationships that you want to get. Had a lot of fun doing this. Another one of those that when you're in a room of people who've had horrendous dating experiences, there's a lot of laughing and crying and everything in between.
Yeah, and I would think a lot of information is useful to people in relationships too, because you kind of have to start sometimes to build intimacy almost from scratch again after.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, we've got a question here. Any insights on preventing slips and relapse, especially around the holidays?
Yeah, this is a tough time of year with slips and relapses. I think that those roles that we play, and even just the culture around excess this time of year, can make that difficult. A couple of things. I would start with making sure you know why there's a trigger in the first place. So if you don't yet know what your triggering situations are, what brings on that desire to slip and relapse, because slips and relapses don't come out of nowhere. There's usually a process that involves our emotions and cues and triggers in the environment. So knowing that very well, that can be really helpful. I find that when we give a name to something, we can do something about it. So if you have traditions around the holidays of spending time with family, I would definitely recommend getting to know what your triggers are around family, and either being able to avoid those triggers or moderate those triggers. I think the next line of defense there is that somebody else, a supportive person, knows what's going to be triggering to you, and you have some waypoints set up to check in with that person. I remember in the early days of my own recovery, in order to do Christmas with my family, I had to have a call with my sponsor prior to walking in the house. And I swear it was like a 3-hour call my first Christmas after we left the house, because I needed a lot of support. And I had to plan that ahead of time. And I'm really glad that I did, because I think if left to my own devices and in my own pain, I wouldn't have called anybody, because I was right back into that mode of, this is overwhelming, this is horrible, I can't do this. The thing that got me on the phone instead of relapsing was I knew that my sponsor was expecting a call, because we'd set that up ahead of time. So I think really taking a look at what your plans are and what's going to come up for you, and make really specific plans around avoiding those. Make plans. You might role play with somebody in recovery. If you're going to be, let's say alcohol is your issue and you're going to be a party where there's alcohol, you might role play refusing a drink, or making alternative plans. But I don't think you can plan enough in order to avoid that, because your mind has such an automatic way, and that's why you slip and relapse, is because you're not thinking about what I want now. You're just moving into that old way of thinking. So plan ahead would be my insight there.
Yeah, 100% echo that. The more you can be in touch with empathetic other people who know your situation, the easier it's going to be. And bookending before and after, like Jonathan suggested, it works, because you get in a little better headspace before you go in, and you have to make a call when you get out. And if you don't, your phone is going to ring and your sponsor's going to say, "Hey, what's up?" "Oh, well, I was going to the bookstore." "No, you're not. Turn around."
Yeah. There was even something I think this was my second Christmas in recovery where, again, I knew I was going to be talking to my sponsor. And I'm in the middle of this interaction in the family, and I could feel my old role and my way of interacting coming up. And the thought came to me like, I don't want to have to talk to my sponsor about this. And so I course corrected. I got up and left the room and got some alone time. And I think that accountability and help around these holiday times is indispensable.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we've got another question here. This is from the wife of a sex addict. Should I tell my husband about my triggers? This is the wife again. He has not been very responsive in the past few weeks. He is 11 months in sobriety. Is it better for me to find a way to talk to someone else about my struggles? Good question.
Yeah. To me, and they specify here, the husband is the sex addict here.
Yeah.
So to me, it's not as black and white as should I or shouldn't I. This reminds me of something that I discovered about my birthdays about 5 years ago. I used to be of the opinion that my day of birth was an opportunity for everybody else to celebrate me, and they were going to plan these celebrations and invite me to them, and I was going to be thrilled. The only problem was that year after year, I felt very unfulfilled and very let down because other people were in charge. Like I was leaving it all up to other people to provide me what I needed. And so I made a change about 5 years ago, and I let my spouse know, and my kids now know this, and my youngest is 5 and his birthday's coming up in a few weeks, and he's been reminding us, I can do whatever I want on my birthday. It is my day. I will plan it. And so I've started doing that because I know I get my needs met that way. So I plan get-togethers. I plan what I want to do. I invite the people that I want to be there. And anything that anybody gives on top of that is just icing on the cake. I get nothing after that. I still have my needs covered. So when it comes to sharing triggers with a spouse, especially in that, I would say that first year to 18 months of sobriety, empathy may not be a strong point for them. That's something that they may still need to work on. So counting on your spouse to be able to hold the trigger by yourself could leave you feeling like I'm not getting what I need. So I would recommend a both and approach. If you have a support system in your own recovery, you might want to consider reaching out to some people who you know will get it and who will show up with compassion and love and helpfulness when you have a trigger, and get that need met first. And then I would take it to your spouse if you feel safe doing that, if you want to give them an opportunity to respond again. But you're not doing that from a place of intense need and a place where you can be hurt. You're doing that from, I've taken care of my raw trigger, and now me sharing my trigger with you is more a point of accountability, meaning I'm giving you accounting of what's going on for me. And so when we share that with our spouse after we've gotten the support we need from our support network, it's more of a, for your information, here's what's going on with me. And then if your spouse surprises you and shows up empathetic and supportive, great, that's a win. If they don't, if they're not quite getting it, you know somebody that you can reach out to because you just recently talked to them, and you can reach out to them and you can get some help with those feelings of being let down by your spouse, or your spouse not being able to be there for you in the way that you need. But outside of issues concerning abuse and safety, I think a lot of people really underestimate what their relationships can hold. And so we err on the side of doing a lot separately instead of giving our relationships an update of where we're at, or an opportunity to lean in, an opportunity to show up for each other. Yeah, that's how I would.
Is it a little bit different, Jonathan, if the husband is specifically doing or saying something that's triggering the wife?
Yes. So that would be the side of giving your partner some feedback about how their behavior impacts you. And that's how I would share that feedback. Again, we can get into that power struggle saying, you said this and it made me feel never, ever do that again, versus the approach that's like, hey, if we want to have a relationship that works really well, which I do, that's why I'm still here and that's why I'm committed. When you talk to me like this, or when you say that, it makes it really, really difficult for me to feel safe. It makes it difficult for me to have confidence in you. And we put that out there as information, giving them an opportunity to really internalize that and kind of determine what they're going to do with it. But I think that information absolutely needs to be shared, especially if it's related to something that they're doing.
And just as an addict who has been on the receiving end of that kind of information once or twice or more, it's appreciated. I always appreciate when anybody tells me something I'm doing that bothers them. I may or may not decide to change that, but at least I know that it bothers them and I can make my decisions with that in mind, because a lot of times I'm clueless.
Yeah, I think one of the opportunities that recovery opens up in our relationship is an opportunity to move from a closed, secretive system into an open, honest, transparent system. And that goes both ways. Sometimes the information that we're sharing isn't some deep, dark secret. Sometimes it's this, hey, this is how you impact me. And both parties in the relationship, regardless of their responsibility in getting us where we're at, we both have an ability to add to this new culture. So if that's something that you want in your relationship going forward, you can model that to your partner. I'll talk to you about what's going on for me, and I'll do that in a direct, honest way. And your partner can do that back for you. And I think that's one of the opportunities that recovery opens up for couples, is this, we can talk about things when they come up. We're getting a lot of practice doing that in therapy and in the rooms. So let's practice it together too.
Thanks, Jonathan. We've got another question here. I recently found out my partner has been having ongoing online affairs for the length of our 6-year relationship. I'm sorry to hear that. He seems to be in stage 1, even though he wrote to his affair partner and told her he wouldn't be in touch with her anymore. He recently lied about contacting her again. Does setting a healthy boundary for myself around the relationship, what I will and won't do moving forward now, tend to increase resistance? It seems like the only thing to do at this point, unfortunately. Are there any other suggestions?
Great question. Because here's the thing about pre-contemplation and contemplation. The thing that actually helps that move forward is dissonance. So when we're confronted with our beliefs and our behavior that don't align, or we're confronted with our behavior and the results of those behavior and it doesn't align, that's one of the main things that helps people move forward. So this, again, kind of like we talked about in the previous question, a boundary is not the same as a request. Boundaries can have requests in them. Boundaries can have some direction in them, but really a boundary is a statement of, this is where I'm at. So oftentimes at this stage in recovery, the boundary might sound something like, when you lie to me, it makes me have much less confidence that this relationship is going to be a good place for me to be. So I'm stepping back right now because I don't feel safe. And there's that quality of really direct feedback. There's creating some dissonance, not creating some dissonance, but highlighting the dissonance for your partner, and allowing him to feel that, like, oh, I've got to weigh it here. Do I want my affair partner, or do I want the person that I've been with for 6 years? And if that's where you're at in the process, being able to say, it's me or this, and not in an ultimatum sort of a way, but just pointing out, I'm not going to be okay with you having both, and this is not working for me. And leaving it there for your partner to stew over, to think about, to feel. Because when it comes to dissonance, a difference between our beliefs and our behavior, one of the two has to change. Either we have to believe how we think about it, or we have to change our behavior. We have to change our belief, or we have to change our behavior, or we have to change both often. And when as the partner who's been hurt, if we say nothing, if we take that hands off, you're going to do what you're going to do approach, then we don't give that kind of grief that I think people need in order to change them. And the great thing about early recovery is we don't have to manufacture a lot of that grief. It's there and it's all over the place. And so being able to name it, being able to talk about what you will and won't be able to tolerate, what will and won't work for you, that heightens your partner's awareness of the choice that they have to make. And then as with all boundary setting, you set the boundary and then you step back to where it's safe for you and you observe how they respond to that boundary. If he continues to keep secrets and he continues to lie, that tells you something that you need to know. If he takes another step into some recovery, into some change, that tells you something you need to know as well.
Jonathan, I love how you explain boundaries. I always find, particularly with sponsees new to recovery, they don't understand what boundaries are. They think boundaries are controlling someone else's behavior. That's not what they're about.
Yeah.
Boundaries are about when something happens, this is how I feel. And when I feel this way, this is how I'm going to respond to protect myself. That's a boundary. And then they also think, oh, well, if I set boundaries, nobody's ever going to get close to me. And I say, no, boundaries are not about keeping other people out. They're about letting other people safely in.
Yeah.
And I loved how you described that, the process.
Yeah. I think about my boundaries as an awareness of beyond what limit am I no longer the very best person that I can be. And that's what it's communicating to people, So often I have a boundary around when I need to go to bed, because I know past a certain hour, I'm not super relational. I'm not fun to be around. And that's not a statement of when everybody needs to go to bed around me. That's me saying, this is the kind of sleep that I need, and this is what I'm going to do. And I can communicate that. And like you said, Scott, boundaries don't keep people out. I think boundaries give people an idea of where they can meet us in a way that will work for us.
Yeah, this leads us right into our next question here. This is from the wife, I assume, of a sex addict. He tries to tell me he has no friends because of me. She says it's his choice not to keep in contact. She's not his mother. She doesn't want to plan his play dates. She wants to know how she can balance her boundaries with his free will.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that really surprised me when I was getting trained in Gottman therapy, which is emotive marriage therapy, is how often they talked about the term negotiation. And at first I hated it, because I was like, negotiation has no place in a marriage. That's for businesses and boardrooms. That's for figuring out employment contracts and buying a car. But negotiation is a really, really big part of how we navigate relationships. And a critical part of negotiation is both sides indicating to the other what they want out of the negotiation. Now, oftentimes in early recovery, that's not explicitly stated. I can't remember where I heard this from, but I heard it said that outcome is the biggest indicator of intent. And so as we enter into this negotiation in early recovery, what a lot of the addicts that I work with, it takes them a while to grasp this, is they're communicating through their behavior and through their response to the spouse that they've betrayed. They're communicating what they want out of the relationship. And sometimes what they're communicating is, I would like this to be imbalanced. I would like it for me not to be accountable. I would like you to swallow your feelings and we move on. And again, that may not be explicitly stated, but if that's what the behavior is saying, that's part of what you consider in that negotiation. If those are the terms my spouse is outlining, are those okay for me? And so, again, boundaries aren't about control. They're not about telling people what to do and what not to do. It's about saying, another way of looking at boundaries is like an electrical fence. I remember when I was a little boy getting together with cousins out in the woods somewhere, and we found an electrical fence. And some of my older cousins were saying, it doesn't shock you that bad. And so we experimented for probably a couple of hours around like, how badly could you get shocked by this fence? And I think it ended up where we were holding on to it as long as we could and then letting go. It wasn't extremely high voltage. It's not like it was keeping raptors out of the park or things like that. But there's a sign that said, do not touch electric fence. And we could do whatever we wanted to with that fence because it was just a sign. But it was an indicator that beyond this point, the rules are different. Beyond this point, there are consequences. And I think our boundaries work much the same way. They're not hard and fast things that control behavior for our partners or for ourselves. It's simply a no trespass sign. And if we put out that sign and the people in our life continue to ignore that sign is there, again, I think that's some data that we need. If we put out that sign and our partner stops and is like, okay, I'm not sure why this sign is here, but I'm really curious about that. Can you tell me more about that? Or I don't like that this sign is here, but I need to know why you've put it here so that can make sense to me, not in a the addicted partner needs to give permission or anything. But again, it's that negotiation factor. Can we talk about why it's the way that it is, and can we come to an understanding, even if you don't like it, that this is what I need right now? And if you want to indicate your commitment to our relationship, if you want to indicate your commitment to helping me feel safe, this is something you could do that would be a big deposit in my account.
Yeah, not every couple is going to agree on every little thing,
Right.
either. There are ways that you can, as a couple, agree to disagree. If you think you should spend $200 on Christmas and he thinks you should spend $400 on Christmas, that's a disagreement.
Yeah.
Over something not, you can either compromise at 300, or one of you can win, or you can both win, and you can spend 200 and he can spend 400, and you can both be okay with it. The therapists will sometimes walk couples who just seem to argue through respectful conflict agreements. And they'll have you sign a contract saying this is how we're going to resolve conflicts, things like that. But that's different than boundaries.
Right. And I would also point out that kind of negotiating is really different. Boundaries are something that just you determine. Like, nobody else gets an opinion on your boundaries. That being said, we can have reasonable boundaries and we can have unreasonable boundaries. But I don't know that it's so much a matter of balancing your boundaries with his free will as much as it is like, it's really important that we're honest with each other about what we're needing and why we can or cannot come to the negotiating table on this. In couples where there's not addiction, this is one of my favorite statistics about romantic relationships and marriages. 69% of all issues between partners are non-resolvable. Meaning we're not going to reach a consensus. We're not going to reach this understanding. There's a couple things that tells me is, first of all, we just need 31% to be happy. That's in happy couples that 69% are non-resolvable. So we just need 31% where we overlap in order to be happy. It also tells me that a lot of the skill in relationships going forward is being able to navigate those perpetual issues. And it's not so much about resolving them. So this whole, like, here's my boundaries and here's his free will. I think the bigger story that you're observing there is, how do we navigate when we don't see eye to eye? Do I feel respected? Do I feel heard? Do I feel like there's empathy there? Do I feel dismissed? Do I feel shut down? Because like you said, Scott, long-term, you may not agree. But if that disagreement is handled with some respect, some empathy, some negotiation, some give and take, that's going to feel a lot different than I say I need and my partner says, no way, that's crazy.
Yeah, over the years, I've had to, here's a therapeutic term, stay in my own hula hoop. I've had to learn to stay in my own hula hoop. If it's in my hula hoop, I get to control it. If it's not in my hula hoop, it's not mine. And that's been a hard thing for me to learn, because I'm a control freak. And, when you're partnered with an addict, you want to control the addiction. You want to control every aspect of his or her life, because things will go better if you're in charge, and they probably would.
Yeah.
But, back to the question, you say your husband thinks he has no friends because of you. Well, no, it's his problem that he has no friends. You're right about that. But it's his problem to rectify as well. You can, I would say, you can say, gosh, I wish you had some male friends that you could confide in, who would give you honest feedback when you're being a jerk or whatever. But after that, you kind of have to step back, and it's up to him to make changes in his life,
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
We're coming near the end here. Do we have any more? Oh, I see we have one more question. Looks like we'll follow up. This is a follow-up. He tries to make me feel guilty because I told him it was the porn or me. He chose to stop looking at porn, but then tells me he wants to live he wasn't meant to live in a PG world. He refuses to see how bad his rejection of me for porn was, and it's a huge boundary for me. You want to comment on that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I've said this today, and I've said it in the past. Empathy is not a strong suit early in recovery, and it's unfortunate that it's not, because a lot of empathy is needed. You know, something that I've seen effective here, or that can be helpful. Oftentimes, it's hard to take feedback from the person that we live with, because we have a lot at stake in that relationship. We've mentioned Rob's book, Out of the Doghouse, here before. I've found that many of the addicts that I work with are more open to that information from a book, from another source, at least initially, because when it's their partner's story and their role in that, there is a lot of defensiveness, and there's a lot in the way of seeing that. So my heart really goes out to you. That's a very difficult, it's a very difficult relationship to be in, and a difficult situation to be in. But if you're sick of talking about it and don't feel like that's going anywhere, encouraging your partner to read some books about betrayal trauma, and things like that can help. That may help to crack the nut a bit. But yeah, it's one of those things. I wish that insight kept pace with the need for empathy and the need for connection, but often insight's lagging a little bit behind those needs.
Yeah, and just, men are kind of naturally bad at empathy anyway. Women, I think, in general, are much better at empathy.
I would say that men are taught to not be good at empathy. We have the capacity for it, but our society doesn't reward empathetic men like it rewards empathetic women.
Yeah, well said. When I was, again, a story of me in treatment, I can't remember, was this one or the one I was on earlier, but one of the therapists was talking about empathy. Now, I'm a writer by trade, and I can do the New York Times crossword in like 20 minutes. I had to go look it up. It was a word that I knew, and it just never registered with me because it wasn't anything I was interested in. And I asked the therapist, when will I start to feel some empathy? And he said, I don't know, maybe around the 5-year mark. I think he was joking a little bit, but he was just telling me, don't count on it anytime soon. You're going to have to practice. And I had to sometimes ask people, I know you're feeling something. What is it? Because I'm not getting it.
Yeah, empathy is a skill that's totally practicable. We can actually increase our empathy skills by practicing things like that. Tell me what that look is on your face. I want to know what you're feeling.
Yeah, so he's not so early in recovery, just a lot of denial. She says he's been in recovery for 3 years. Really
long pre-contemplation and contemplation there.
Yeah. I would definitely suggest getting him the book Out of the Doghouse, because it's written specifically for men who've cheated, who want to stay in their relationship and understand. And it's written to help men understand what their wives and girlfriends are going through.
It's very direct, honest feedback. That's probably the quality of the book I appreciate the most. Is it doesn't waste time getting into the topic, and it doesn't mince words.
Yeah, he tells it like it is. So we are pretty well out of time here. So I want to thank Jonathan for hosting our session today, and I want to thank everybody for coming in today. We will be back next week, same time, same place.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Yeah, tell your friends. Check out the rest of the website. We've got podcasts. There's a great new podcast this week from Dr. Pat Love about rebuilding sexual intimacy in a relationship after the relationship has been damaged. So that's totally worth listening to.
Pat Love is one of my favorite people to listen to speak. So yeah, definitely, I'll be checking that one out.
Yeah, highly recommended. So we'll see everyone next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Bye-bye.